Hello, everyone. Welcome to this 53rd webinar on a treatise on cosmic fire. This webinar series is available on makara.us under the subheadings Mori Federation webinars, then webinar series in progress as shown here. All episodes of the Secret Teachings of All Ages and the Secret Doctrine series are also available on YouTube. Just do a search for Francis Donald and the webinar you wish to view. You can join any of these webinars on the homepage of moriafederation.com up here in the upper left-hand corner, and that will bring up a hot link that'll bring you right in. Okie doke. Last month, we continued with the subsection entitled The Centers and the Senses. Been on this for a while now. We began our last session with the study of the three types of separation. Involution, the separation of matter, or the one becoming the many. Evolution, the merging of spirit and matter. And evolution on the path, the merging of spirit and matter. The underlying theme of all three stages is that as long as the sense of self is associated with the cosmic physical plane at any level, one lives in separation from one's true being. These three phases of manifestation involve various combinations of the energy of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, the creator, the preserver, and the destroyer. DK then briefly describes the Atmic plane level of sight called realization, which allows the initiate to see and comprehend the means by which the life aspect permeates all creation, can literally see the self at the center of the forms that the self has drawn to itself. Next, we explored a chart that contrasts the lowest and highest demonstrations of each sense, followed by a description of how each sense enables a particular relationship between the self and not self. This is followed by a summary statement describing the evolving relationship between the self and the not self. Quote, "In all these perfections is seen the awareness of the self and the graded process of identification, utilization, manipulation, and final rejection of the not self by that self who is now consciously aware." So he's describing an Atmic condition of awareness, which is indicated by the term "in all these perfections," because each sense is a demonstration of perfect awareness. This is followed by he hears the note of nature and that of his monad. He recognizes their identity, utilizes their vibration, and passes rapidly through the three stages of creator, preserver, and destroyer. So even though he's talking about someone who has come into Atmic awareness, he describes the passage from he describes the nature of identification with the not self in these four stages, right? That mark one's progressing relationship with the not self. First of all, you identify with the not self, and then you begin gradually to utilize the not self. And then as your mastery grows, you begin to manipulate the not self. That includes your environment and other people. And finally, in the stage that he is describing in this paragraph, which is Atmic consciousness, you finally reject the not-self, having drawn from it everything that you can possibly use in order to ascend to this stage of consciousness. And this takes us up to where we left off last time. So, I encourage you, as I always do, to contribute in any way that works for you. Ask questions. If you think if you don't quite understand something, believe me, there's going to be another dozen people in our virtual room that also don't understand some aspect of it. So don't be shy about asking questions or about putting forward comments. The only thing I ask is that you keep your comments relevant to the material that we're covering. Okay? All right. So next up, DK's summary of the senses continues. Could we get a reader, please?
Yeah, before that, Barbara, did you open your mic to say something?
Yes, I just had a question about the Atma, self and non-self, that I understand that the combination of the two, of the non-individualization and the individualization, have to continue throughout all evolution. So I just wanted a clarification of that.
Yeah, well, in the human scale, one is gaining Atma consciousness at the stage of Master of Wisdom. And so they have become the perfected human being, which means that they use these senses, the five senses. Didn't I list them back here? I think I did. Yeah, well, they're listed here in this second column as their means of demonstrating their consciousness in the lower quaternary and among initiates at their own level. This is, you could call the perfect demonstration of a human being, but as you suggested, consciousness continues, and the nature of the not self continually and the end of the self continues to change. This is the not self that is demonstrates in the lower quaternary, that is described in terms of the rejection by the senses, right? But eventually the not self becomes the entire cosmic physical plane. And at the seventh initiation, one which is called the refusal, because one refuses to participate in the physical plane, which is the cosmic physical plane, and reorients oneself completely on the astral plane. Well, at this point, the not self is shifted to a completely different level, and the self is in an ongoing process of discovery, right? It's in accordance with which of the seven paths into cosmic reality one takes, which determines the nature of that. You could call it the interface with the true self. Does that help? Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. It just apparently the masters and many higher beings are individuated. They have in some way a little different dharma or purpose. And so I think it's how does that slight individualization, slight differentiation of purpose, stay fully integrated in the Atmic?
Yeah, well, that dharma, as you call it, first of all, is to work with all those who are still under the great illusion of the lower quaternary. And, we're doing this now, even, you through your own elevation of understanding and through, helping your brothers and sisters on whatever path of service you have chosen. But eventually this becomes, you gain the ability to actually extend a kind of potency that's demonstrated in, the lives of all the great masters, from the Christ to all the Indian masters, where through touch, through voice, you are able to very much accelerate the passage of those who are gathered around you. And that becomes the quality of your dharma, right? But then it shifts again and it becomes more planetary, where you're working with the kingdoms in nature in terms of your field of service, rather than with individual human beings or groups of human beings. Eventually, of course, you're working with solar systems and congeries of solar systems. It's an unending progression into further consciousness.
Thank you very much. Very, very helpful.
You're welcome, Barbara. Yes, Maria Cristina Donadio. How are you?
Hi. I'm
Good.
I'm working with the not self and consider it. I volunteered for this particular work of redemption on this levels. It is painful sometimes to be immersed in the physical, etheric, astral, and mental, as we know. And being a good little rebel only makes it harder because I tend to myself rebel. Beam me up, Scotty, from way back when. But we do have purpose in being here now, as you say, in this particular field of service, that the vistas only expand, of course, as we work, and I guess succeed at redeeming and letting go and passing through the fires, stimulating the little atomic lives which comprise our little personal masks, our personalities. So I'm just very aware of that, even as there be the vistas, of course, are infinite.
Yeah, well said. That's the automatic service that we get, right? Which, by just incarnating, we're helping to lift those atomic lives, just by, you could say, overseeing their participation in our vehicles. Just that
Right.
alone, you don't even have to be a disciple to be at that level of service, right? Then we come into awareness, unfolding degrees of awareness of purpose, which is ultimately laid down for us in the plan. And someone like a master of wisdom knows the plan at a much greater degree than we do. But how we choose to fulfill the plan, to
Well,
serve that plan, how we choose to serve the plan is up to us. And, we're invited, you could say, by our soul to find an effective and appropriate, given our equipment, way to serve the plan.
I just will add, I just read where the masters are not called masters within hierarchy. They're called or custodians of the plan.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Yeah, they're masters really that's a good point. They're masters from our point of view, among themselves. They're completely transparent. And that transparency has to do with the fact that they're agencies for serving the plan, rather than we still are oriented to personalities, if possibly soul infused personality, but nonetheless, uh, personal orientation. That is that vortex of energy that is singular. But at the level of a master of wisdom, first of all, it's completely group consciousness. They're the invigorating principle in an ashram, and that's their expression. And the work that ashram does, is the nature of their interface with the plant. So thank you, Christina. Maria Christina.
No, Christina is good. Not
Okay.
Maria. Not
Not,
Maria.
not just Maria.
Maria
Okay.
Cristina Quina. Gracias.
Okay. Let's see. Where are we here? Okay. So up next, DK continues with this summary. So could we get a reader, please?
And Veronica.
He touches or feels the vibration of the form or not self in all its various grades, recognizes his identity in time and space, and for purposes of existence or being, and by means of the three laws of economy, attraction, and synthesis, utilizes, blends, and eventually disassociates himself. He sees the threefold evolutionary process, and by means of the development of the inner vision, sees within the heart of the system, macrocosmic and microcosmic, the one self in many forms, and finally identifies with that one self by the conscious rejection of the not self after its complete subjugation and utilization.
Thank you, and Veronica. Okay. First up, he touches. We're going up through the senses now. He touches or feels the vibration of the form or not self in all its various grades, recognizes his identity in time and space, and for purposes of existence or being, and by means of the three laws of economy, attraction and synthesis, utilizes, blends, and eventually dissociates himself. So first, through the senses of sound and touch, the initiate attunes to the inherent vibration of the not self, and in this way identifies with the form aspect of the lower quaternary. In so doing, he or she enters the realm where time and space rule. During this involutional phase, which is ruled by the law of economy, she contacts and eventually utilizes the form. During the next stage, using both the law of attraction and repulsion, the indweller takes on ever more refined vehicles of expression, while at the same time dissociating herself from outworn and inadequate forms. Finally, under the law of synthesis, the initiate dissociates him or herself from all forms. We might hypothesize that at this stage, all the senses are expressing themselves at atmic levels. Next, he sees the threefold evolutionary process, and by means of the development of the inner vision, sees within the heart of the system, macrocosmic and microcosmic, the one self, all in caps, in many forms. And finally identifies himself with that one self by the conscious rejection of the non-self after its complete subjugation and utilization. So DK here suggests that Buddhic or divine vision and Atmic realization are the means by which the self is finally seen at the center, drawing to itself from out of the form world that which it needs for optimal expression on whatever stage in the journey that the indweller is experiencing. But this is that very particular quality of contact with the true self, even having an experience of that self at macrocosmic levels, right, which would be the monad on its own plane and its association with higher forms, right? And then seeing how, from that point of view of the true self, how it gathers to itself the forms that it needs in order to carry out the work that it's doing, right? This is would be a very high stage of becoming. This would be an Atmic realization, probably experienced by, I would think, a master of wisdom, and then even a Chohan who would have this direct experience with the self. It would be a key part of the return to monadic consciousness. Notice how on the physical plane, listed here on the left-hand side, the five senses are experienced more or less as separate. But as we move through the planes to their higher correspondences, they begin to coalesce, eventually providing, in terms of the Atmic level here, subtly parallel ways of recognizing and rejecting the not self, while at the same time sensing the true self. DK just gave us how the sense of sight is used in this transition. Okay, next up, the sense of taste. Could we get a reader, please?
Barbara, you want to read?
Yes. D, tasting. He tastes then and finally discriminates. For taste is the great sense that begins to hold sway during the discriminating process that takes place when the illusory nature of matter is in process of realization. Discrimination is the educatory process to which the self subjects itself in the process of developing intuition, that faculty whereby the self recognized its own essence in and under all forms. Discrimination concerns the duality of nature, the self and the not self, and is a means of their differentiation in the process of abstraction. The intuition concerns unity and is the capacity of the self to contact other selves, and is not a faculty whereby the not self is contacted. Hence its rarity these days, owing to the intense individualization of the ego and its identification with the form. Unnecessary identification at this particular time. As the sense of taste on the higher planes is developed, it leads one to even finer distinctions till one is finally led through the form, right to the heart of one's nature.
Thank you, Barbara. Okay, first, tasting. He tastes, then and finally discriminates. For taste is the great sense that begins to hold sway during this discriminating process that takes place when the illusory nature of matter is in process of realization. So discrimination is a sense of taste as it demonstrates on the mental plane. This is a natural extension of imagination, which is taste on the astral plane. This fourth sense, which demonstrates on the fourth mental subplane, thus acts as a gateway between the higher and lower triads. Desire stimulates our imagination, and as a result, preferences, which evolve over time, are developed. These preferences are characterized by what is called taste, as in he or she has good taste. This exploration of quality leads to mental discrimination, which in turn reveals the true nature of that which is being explored. Can we get a reader for this passage from Destiny of Nations?
Gordon, you want to read?
The instinct which has characterized this passing sixth ray period, and which has been noticeably fostered under its influence, is that of taste. Taste in food, in human intercourse, in color, in form, in art and architecture, and in all branches of human knowledge. This discriminating taste has reached a relatively high degree of development during the past 2,000 years, and good taste is a highly cherished mass virtue and objective today. This is a totally new thing, and one which has been hitherto the prerogative of the highly cultured few. Ponder on this. It connotes evolutionary achievement. For the disciples of the world, the sense of taste has to be transmuted into its higher correspondence, a discriminating sense of values. Hence, the clear emphasis laid in all textbooks on discipleship on the need to develop discrimination. Desire, taste, discrimination. These are the values under the sixth ray for all evolutionary unfoldment and peculiarly the goal of all disciples.
Thank you, Gordon. Important here is taste's expression through the sixth ray. Also says it up here. For example, consider the highly evolved sense of design in Italy, which has a sixth ray soul and a fourth ray personality. Fourth ray allowing it to align with the fourth sense, which is taste. Next, discrimination is the educatory process to which the self subjects itself in the process of developing intuition, that faculty whereby the self recognizes its own essence in and under all forms. That's a great definition for the intuition. So intuition is taste on the Buddhic plane. First, through imagination, preferences evolve. This calls forth our ability to explore and discriminate between the thought forms that we attach to the not self, thus gradually revealing the underlying essence. When this is touched, this underlying essence, the intuition begins to inform both our discrimination and our imaginations. Okay, thoughts or questions, anybody? All right. Next. Discrimination concerns the duality of nature, the self and the not self, and is the means of their differentiation in the process of abstraction. This is a key statement. It takes a bit of pondering, but we tend to use the term discrimination to determine the difference between one aspect of the not self from another aspect of the not self. But once higher mind is activated, we can begin to discriminate between the vibratory quality of the inner essence and all that surrounds and imprisons that essence. Let's take a look at what MDR has to say on this point. Could we get a reader, please?
Janet.
At the fourth initiation, ruled in part by Mercury and Saturn, the self must be discriminated from the not self. It is at this initiation that a significant abstraction occurs, for the consciousness is removed from the confines of the causal body and abstracted or elevated into buddhi consciousness. This is another way of saying that discrimination serves buddhi, and through its proper exercise, gives place to intuition, the major faculty of the Buddhic plane.
Thank you, Janet. Okay, next. The intuition concerns unity and is the capacity of the self to contact other selves, and is not a faculty whereby the not self is contacted. So another important point, one doesn't employ the intuition in order to understand any aspect of the not self, as in, I just had this intuition that I should eat cornflakes this morning, right? When intuition is gained, the law of magnetic impulse, esoterically called the law of polar union, which controls soul-to-soul contact, comes into play. They're really the same idea. The intuition is all about interconnection at soul levels. And when one is attempting to understand the second aspect, then one is able to draw on the intuition, but not when one is attempting to understand more fully the nature of the third aspect, or the not self. This is an easy mistake to make. Then one is using discrimination, right? Finer and finer levels of discrimination to determine the nature of the not self, until the intuition pops through and you begin to replace that orientation with the quality of intuiting the nature of other selves, a capital S. Next, hence its rarity these days, owing to the intense individualization of the ego and its identification with the form. A necessary identification at this particular time. So the long path on which the third aspect is explored, beginning with quote unquote individualization of the ego, culminates with the integrated personality, which is as yet still separate in consciousness from the soul. This is the developing condition, particularly associated with the fifth sign Leo, during the fifth subrace of this fifth root race, whose purpose is the development of lower mind, and which, during its sixth subrace, will lead to the awakening of the higher mind, except for those who choose to push the envelope and through discipleship to make contact with higher mind during this fifth subrace. Next, as the sense of taste on the higher planes is developed, it leads one to ever finer distinctions until one is finally led through the form right to the heart of one's nature. Actually, all the senses lead from a preoccupation with form and the information that can be gained there to that which underlies the form. But the three aspects of imagination, discrimination, and intuition are particularly well suited for the transition from not self to self, because each of these aspects of the sense of taste seeks out and engages the energies that underlie the illusory not self. For example, imagining forms that represent a high stage of evolution invokes discrimination. So you have imagination that evokes a discriminatory process of choosing forms that represent a higher stage of evolution, by which those imagined forms gradually become more representative of spirit. This penetration then invokes the intuition, which reveals the underlying essence. There's also a fourth ray connection in here. This is the fourth sense on all these levels. Fourth ray is particularly attuned to the artistic expression, and the description that I just gave you is very much that of an artist, right? Using the imagination to draw in forms that are expressive of a higher reality, and then through the sense of discrimination, refining those choices until the forms, whether in music, in art, in dance, in any of the arts, finally represent a stage of spiritual reality that then invokes the intuition. Yes, Barbara.
So I think in some ways we're talking about the challenge of the antakarana, and what is an impulse that helps go from a lower vibratory manifestation to a higher one. So it may be that those at very high levels of the sense of taste help us evolve and actually move across the bridge of the antakarana. And maybe it's sort of a creative impulse, the higher creative impulse of society that is helping in some way evolution. Because we ask, really, how does the life wave make it through the ascent of evolution? And it may be that these instances of moving to higher taste help us with that process.
Yeah, you make a good point. First of all, the number 4 is very important here. Where do you build? Where do you begin the process of building the antakarana? At the fourth subplane of the mental plane, right, with a mental unit. And so there's you can never discount these number associations that, using the imagination from that plane of the mental unit to visualize the crossing of the antakarana, and therefore you immediately, as soon as you engage your imagination, you immediately begin discriminating to refine this imaginatory process. We do this at every pre-full moon. By the way, there's a pre-full moon tomorrow for Sagittarius. And, we continuously refine this process of imagining that the transcending that gap or closing that gap between the mental unit and the monastic permanent atom. And in so doing, one eventually draws forth the powers of the intuition. So I think there's a very definite connection with the Antakarana. Good point. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Okay.
Oh gosh. So I
Is this Maria Christina?
yes, here I am again. But
Yeah.
the initial petals of the egoic lotus, that is to say, the knowledge petals,
Mm-hmm.
some of them begin to be opened even before we start doing that conscious work on that fourth mental subplane, have already unfolded.
Oh, certainly.
Starting, certainly, and would they be considered a part of the Antakarana? I guess Antakarana is just consciously building that bridge, perhaps.
There are all these orientations that take us to higher levels, all these, paths um, coexist, are happening at the same time. The Kundalini fire rises, the petals of the egoic lotus unfold. We bridge the Antakarana, and there's many other analogies for this, for instance, the one we're exploring now, the progression through the senses, right? All of these are happening simultaneous, and it's in a series of webinars, Michael Robbins, it's like 102 webinars just on the unfoldings of the egoic petals, right? But what he tries to do in that is pinpoint by associative relating of the other writings of DK, pinpoint just what's going on, at the opening of each petal. Like, well, at the opening of the fourth petal, then what's happening with the chakras at that point? Where is your consciousness in terms of awareness on astral and mental levels? In trying to bring it all together. It just so happens he did that series with the orientation on opening the egoic petals. He could have chosen any one of them, and it's because DK tends to develop each of these paths individually. We're left kind of on our own to determine how they interrelate. Just what is happening in one line of development when one is developing along another line.
Makes us work.
That's the work. Yes, Tom?
Yeah, I have understood also so that the building of the Antakarana is making the connection between the mental molecule and the mental atom, and in between is the causal lotus, and that's actually what we are doing when we build the Antakarana, is to solve the riddle of the lotus, to make the connection. So that's how I conceptually see it.
Yeah, well, see, you used your imagination and you discriminated as to which forms to choose to make your understanding and vision of that building come about, right? And as you continue to push in that direction, that will shift, that will become more and more refined until you're actually in line with and aligned with the true process itself. It's a good example. I like that idea of crossing the causal waters, which would be the three subplanes, highest subplanes of the mental plane, one could see them as causal waters. Anyone else? Good stuff. Appreciate the interaction. All right. Next up, we move on to the sense of smell. Could we get a reader, please?
Yeah, Magda. Feel like reading?
Yes. Smelling is the faculty of keen perception that eventually brings a man back to the source from whence he came. The archetypal plane, the plane where his true home is to be found. A perception of difference has been cultivated that has caused a divine discontent within the heart of the pilgrim in the far country. The prodigal son draws comparisons. He has developed the other four senses and he utilizes them. Now comes in the faculty of vibratory recognition of the home vibration, if it might be so expressed. It is the spiritual counterpart of that sense which in the animal, the pigeon, and other birds leads them back unerringly to the familiar spot from whence they originally came. It is the apprehension of the vibration of the self and a swift return by means of that instinct to the originating source.
Thank you. Okay, first, smelling is the faculty of keen perception that eventually brings a man back to the source from which he came, the archetypal plane, the plane where his true home is to be found. So the sense of smell on the Buddhic plane is idealism. And on the Atmic plane, all knowledge. But the quote, source from whence he came is in this context, the monadic plane. Thus this final sensory line not only leads not only to perception of the self, but to the actual plane on which the self has its being, which is appropriate for this highest of the five senses. Next, a perception of difference has been cultivated that has caused a divine discontent within the heart of the pilgrims in the far country. The prodigal son draws comparisons. He has developed the other four senses and he utilizes them. Note that it is the perception of difference that awakens divine discontent. DK traces this upward path of discontent in this passage from Rays and Initiations. Could we get a reader, please?
Christina.
There is, oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. There is an inevitability in living the life of the spirit, which is at once its horror and its joy, and I mean just that. The symbol or first expression of this, for all in the three worlds, is but the symbol of an inner reality, is the driving urge to betterment, which is the outstanding characteristic of the human family. The human animal, excuse me. From discontent to discontent he passes, she passes, driven by an inner something which constantly reveals to us an enticing vision of that which is more desirable than our present state and experience. At first, this is interpreted by us in terms of material welfare. Then, this divine discontents drive us into a phase of the struggle which is emotional in nature. One craves emotional satisfaction and later intellectual pursuits. All the time, this struggle to attain something ever on ahead creates the instruments of attainment, gradually perfecting them until the threefold personality is ready for a vision of the soul. From that point of tension, the urge and the struggle become more acute until Rule 1 for applicants is understood by us and we step upon the path.
Thank you, Maria Cristina. Okay, so just so refresh your memory, Rule 1 for applicants states, when application has been made in triple form, then let the disciple withdraw that application and forget it has been made. Okay. Finally, now comes in the faculty of vibratory recognition of the home vibration. Love that term. If it might be so expressed. It is the spiritual counterpart of that sense which in the animal, the pigeon and other birds, leads them back unerringly to the familiar spot from whence they originally came. It is the apprehension of the vibration of the self and a swift return by means of that instinct to the originating source. Okay, so the home vibration emanates from the monad on the monadic plane, which is first directly felt at the third initiation. It's amazing to learn that this vibration is the source of the homing abilities of the pigeons and other birds, suggesting that though we don't at first consciously experience this home vibration until the third initiation, that it nonetheless innately guides us via our souls onto the path of return. Science tells us that pigeons actually smell the air to guide them home. But there's something very particular about this sense that separates it from the others, and that's this direct apprehension of the vibration of the self, a direct reception of the nature of the self through this highest sense of smell. Okay. Next up, can we get a reader?
Lisa. Oh, wait, she can't read today. Hey, Sam, did you want to read?
Yeah, sure, why not? The consideration of this subject awakens the realization of the vastness of the region of thought concerned, the region of the whole evolutionary development of the human being. At all that is possible here as elsewhere is to indicate lines of thought for careful pondering and to emphasize certain ideas which may serve as the foundation thoughts for the future mental activity of immediate generation. The following facts must be borne in mind when considering the matter. A, that the senses have been dealt with in this division of our treatise on cosmic fire because they concern the material form. Strictly speaking, five senses as we know them are the means of contact built up by the thinker, polarized in his etheric body, and find their expression in the physical form in which the nerve centers, the brain cells, ganglia, and plexus, which exoteric science recognizes.
Thank you, Sam. Okay, first, the consideration of this subject awakens the realization of the vastness of the region of thought concerned, the region of the whole evolutionary development of the human being. Could we but trace the evolution of humanity, we'd find that all that has been gained through humanity's relationship with the not self, all that has been and continues to be learned about our environment and each other has come to us through development and refining of the senses. These gains lead to a constant refining of the forms through which we engage our environment, and to both the unfoldment of the petals of the egoic lotus and to an increased activity of our chakras. Next, yet all that is possible here, as elsewhere, is to indicate lines of thought for careful pondering, and to emphasize certain ideas which may serve as the foundation thoughts for the future mental activity of the immediate generation. So TK here seems to be putting forth the hope that those who read the blue books at the time of their publication, which would have been the immediate generation, would use the ideas presented as seed thoughts to help condition the mental activity of that generation, thus leading, we might hypothesize, to a utilization of these thoughts in all human endeavor. Next, the following facts must be borne in mind when considering the matter. A, that the senses have been dealt with in this division of our treatise on cosmic fire because they concern the material form. Okay, the section we are currently studying, called the internal fires, fire by friction, which is oriented towards the third aspect of divinity, is the first of the three great sections that make up this book. The senses are covered in this first section because, though they have their counterparts on the Buddhic and Atmic planes, nonetheless function in order to gain a comprehensive understanding of the not self, or the third aspect of deity. So it's the bridge to the not self, which is the what is covered in this section 1, the internal fires. Finally, strictly speaking, the five senses as we know them are the means of contact built up by the thinker, polarized in his etheric body, and find their expression in the physical form in those nerve centers, brain cells, ganglia, and plexus, which exoteric science recognizes. So that its physical form is not causal and is therefore not a principle. For this reason, it cannot house the thinker. Instead, the first level of being a principle is at etheric levels. The line of descent that makes up our response apparatus includes the etheric centers, which inform the nadis, N-A-D-I-S, then the, quote, nerve centers, brain cells, ganglia, and plexus, which exoteric science recognizes. Now, there's going to be a similar form to these qualities of the sheaths, also on the astral and mental sheaths, right? We know, DK has told us, that there are etheric centers in the astral and mental sheaths, and we can assume that the nadis, which are these points of electrical interconnection, also exist in the higher sheaths and are probably accessed through the point that they demonstrate through on the physical sheath. And we might, to some extent assume that there's also the other aspects, for instance, an astral nervous system, right? as well as a mental nervous system. But DK doesn't directly describe these. Yes, Jerry.
So I would like to know your opinion and thoughts about the experience of smelling, since we're talking about the sense of smell here, smelling fragrances in meditation that are sublime, and how those fragrances are related to the centers that are being discussed here, or the process of smelling fragrances.
Right.
I-
Well, yeah, go ahead.
in theosophy, there's this teaching that the different masters have, each master has a particular fragrance, like the master M has the fragrance of rose, and KH sandalwood. So what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, the fragrances are associated with different ray types, like for instance, sandalwood is a first ray fragrance, rose is a second ray fragrance. And I think if one, spontaneously has the experience of a fragrance while in meditation, that you're, first of all, it suggests that you're contacting the true source of that fragrance. And just where that source lies, I'm not, capable of telling you, in other words, which subplane of what plane, or it could be the presence of, a high initiate who.
Positive direction is first the effort to identify all soul and personality activity with God.
Okay, I didn't hear that very well. It was somewhat distorted, but yeah, it's a vibratory quality that's specific to that highest sense, right? To the nose on the physical plane and to its counterpart on the higher. I think DK actually lists which centers are receptors of these different senses, and the smell is very definitely connected with the head center, as well as minor centers connected with the nose. But yeah, I couldn't answer you more specifically. I think there would be many different potential sources for fragrances that might be experienced in meditation. And you could determine that by, do you have a teacher that you're allied with? And if so, it could be that it's an indication of gaining access to that teacher, or it could be an ashram, and since the senses are connected with, the fragrances are connected with specific rays, it could indicate the nature or the ray of the ashram that you're connecting with. But beyond that, this takes it into the world of actual spiritual experience, of which I'm, have a very limited experience in. But yeah, those are my thoughts on
Follow up. Is
Sure.
there a section, or is in the writings that talks about the scents and the rays, or the fragrances and the rays? Is that in the writings?
He tells us somewhere. I can't point you to it though. That
Okay.
what I just said, that and Deanna has come back on. Maybe Deanna knows where she got this information from, because I have the same memory. She says rose is second ray, sandalwood first ray. I'm not sure. You know what? You could do you have word search capacity in the blue books?
Yes.
Okay. Search sandalwood. And even rose. There won't be very many instances. And that might take you into the heart of this discussion on that.
Okay. Good idea.
Yeah, and could I ask where he got Master Moria would be Rose? Was that from a source or and because that struck me when you said it, and I can see sandal, the other way around much easier. But I just wondered if there was some reference.
Did you say rose for Master Moria? I didn't.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, I
Where
don't
did that
remember.
come from?
Um, you you know, it's from a theosophical writing. I'm actually trying to track it down right now. It may have been in one of Leadbeater's books. Uh, I'm not sure of the source,
Yeah.
but I'm
Okay,
trying to find it.
Yeah.
thank you.
It wouldn't be. Yeah. Sorry. It wouldn't be the first scent I would associate with Moria. With as a first-rate master, I would think it'd be more likely. Rose is very much associated with the second rate. So, Kuthumi, the Christ. Yeah, but anyway, but it would be interesting to find the source of this information, especially if there's any association between masters and senses in the blue books themselves. I'm not sure that there are. Anyway, let's take a look at Michael's thoughts on this passage.
Tom, do you want to read?
Yep. The archetypal polarization of the thinker is initially in the etheric body, but there can be no doubt that the ability to sense the energy flows of the etheric body increases dramatically with the refinement which evolution brings. As human development proceeds, the focus of human consciousness ascends through the personality vehicles and beyond, bringing an ascending series of senses of psychic powers under generation and cultivation. The expression of these means of contact through nerve centers, brain cells, ganglia, and plexus is merely a reflection of energy structures to be found within the etheric body and with roots even deeper in the subtle nature of man. We note that the senses are built up by the thinker. This means that they are derived from the potency of the soul on its own plane, as that soul is focused within the various vehicles. The study of occult history indicates that over time there has been a considerable development of the senses. Even the 5 normal senses were not always as they are now.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, thoughts or questions? Next up, can we get a reader, please?
And Veronica. And doesn't look like. So, Barbara.
B, that these senses, for all purposes of present manifestation, have their focal point on the astral plane and are therefore largely under the stimulating action of the solar plexus, that great focal point in the center of the body, which is the stimulating agent for most of the human family at this time. C, that as the higher triangle comes into play and the polarization steps up the higher centers, the senses begin to make themselves felt on the mental level, and man becomes aware on that plane. We have in the human body an interesting reflection of the transference of the polarization from the personality to the ego or into the causal body in the division that exists between the higher and the lower mental planes, and the dividing line of the diaphragm between the higher and lower portions of the body.
Thank you, Barbara. Okay, first, that these senses for all purposes of present manifestation have their focal point on the astral plane and are therefore largely under the stimulating action of the solar plexus, that great focal point in the center of the body, which is the stimulating agent for most of the human family at this time. So the physical plane senses having their focal point on the astral plane is not to be confused with the senses that actually demonstrate through their astral sheath, such as clairaudience, psychometry, and clairvoyance. I think what DK means by this statement is that the nature of the experience of the physical senses primarily registers as astral experiences, and thus is felt in the solar plexus due to the great sensitivity of that astral vehicle in this astral Buddhic solar system. This astral orientation is compounded by the fact that the majority of human beings are, at this time, astrally polarized. Hence, it's natural that the solar plexus would be the principal focal point for sensory experience. Also, in this passage, we have a great description of the solar plexus itself, that great focal point in the center of the body. I'm not sure he says that anywhere else, which is the stimulating agent for most of the human family at this time. So, meaning just simply that it's that center through which most of humanity relate as the source of their life stimulation. Okay, next up, C. That as the higher triangle comes into play and the polarization steps up to the higher centers, the senses begin to make themselves felt on the mental level, and man becomes aware on that plane. So you see, we're progressing up through the planes, and just DK is describing how the experience of the centers change as as our consciousness repolarizes on higher planes. On page 169, we learned that the triangle of chakras active among human beings controlled from the mental plane, which is the stage described here, are the base of the spine, the heart, and the throat. This triangle probably represents the quote unquote higher centers here describes. Yeah. Finally, we have in the human body an interesting reflection of the transference of the polarization from the personality to the ego or into the causal body, in the division that exists between the higher and lower mental planes, and the dividing line of the diaphragm between the higher and lower portions of the body. So this is a huge topic that he just hints at here, but let's take a closer look at how the three divisions here described are related. This is just a superficial exploration. Personality-based jiva, which is just shown on this right column, uses only his or her lower mind, whereas the soul-infused personality is, through his or her causal body, polarized in higher mind, which infuses the lower mind, and thus the thought forms constructed there. So there's not a firewall between these two. Once consciousness is gained at this higher level, then the lower level is used as a vehicle for this higher stage. The personality-based person also uses only the lower chakras. However, for purposes of service, these chakras can and are also employed by the soul. The base of the spine center, for instance, is especially active during the later phases of evolution, when soul and spirit emerge into power. The chakras above the diaphragm are those used more usually by the soul, but these centers may also be used by the disciple who is only partially controlled by the ego and is thus still functioning through his or her personality. Any thoughts or questions about this chart and the interconnection? All right. Okay, next up, can we get a reader, please? Sorry.
Gordon, you want to read?
Below the diaphragm, we have the four lower centers. 1, the solar plexus. 2, the spleen. 3, organs of generation. 4, base of the spine. Above are the three higher. 1, heart. 2, throat. 3, head. In the microcosm, we have the lower quaternary separated from the triad in a similar manner, and this analogy will bear pondering upon. By careful thought, we can therefore work out the reflex action of the centers and the senses from the standpoint of the different planes, remembering that as the centers are awakened, the process will be threefold. First, the awakening on the physical plane and the gradual increasing activity of the centers until the probationary path is reached. This is paralleled by the increasing use of the senses and their constant utilization for the identification of the self and its needs.
Thank you. Okay. First, we have the centers below and above the diaphragm listed, followed by, in the microcosm, we have the lower quaternary separated from the triad in a similar manner. And this analogy will bear pondering upon. So the spiritual triad is made up of Atma, Buddhi, Manas, and the lower quaternary by the manasic, astral, etheric, and dense physical subplanes. DK confirms this statement later in TCF, quote, the triad, for instance, is usually looked upon by our students as a triangle formed by the manasic, Buddhic, and Atmic permanent atoms. The cube stands for the lower material man. In order to have a higher triad of chakras, DK has chosen to exclude the Ajna center. He probably is amalgamating it with the head. And in order to create a lower quaternary, DK has chosen to include the spleen. I have to wonder if there is a typo with the word microcosm. And if you can suss this out for me, if you can get a different interpretation, why he would use the word microcosm here, let me know. For it would make more sense to me, at least, if the statement read, in the macrocosm instead of the microcosm, we have the lower quaternary separated from the triad in a similar manner. I say this because the centers already given represent the microcosm. So in order to have an analogy, it seems to me that they would have to be compared to the macrocosm. But whether it's micro or macro, we can still see an energetic connection between the quaternary and the triad. One, the atmic plane is the higher correspondence to the head center. for it is the source of the third logos, synthesizer of the rays of attribute, which DK tells us represent, quote, the totality of monastic energy. 2, the Buddhic plane is the higher correspondence to the heart center, for the Buddhic principle is the source of the love aspect to that which lies below it. And 3, the monastic plane is the higher correspondence to the throat center, since the throat relates to the mental plane. The 4 centers in the lower quaternary relate either to the astral or physical plane, with the solar plexus as the gateway into the astral plane, the spleen as the carrier of prana between the etheric and dense physical planes, the organs of generation functioning on both the astral and physical planes, and the base of the spine anchoring the incarnated life in physical plane existence. Any thoughts or questions about this? I'm going to have to ponder this more, see why he chose the word microcosm. Anyway, next.
I would just have one little comment
Okay, go ahead.
back, which had to do more with the higher 3. And I can't remember where reading that the ajna center, or actually it wasn't even the ajna center, the pituitary gland is linked to the heart. So somehow there's that heart ajna connection.
Right. The glands are specifically related to these centers, right? With the head center related to the pineal, and as you say, the pituitary to the heart. Thank you. Yeah. Get back here where I was. Okay. Okay, next up, by careful thought, we can therefore work out the reflex action of the centers and the senses from the standpoint of the different planes, remembering that as the centers are awakened, the process will be threefold. Okay, a reflex action is an involuntary and instantaneous response to a stimulus. Thus, DK seems to be suggesting that the stimuli gathered via the senses immediately impacts the centers. Over the last few pages, DK has revealed the plane sense correlations. We have the hearing related to the physical plane and to the base of the spine, but also to the throat center. Touch to the astral plane and the solar plexus. Sight to the mental plane and the ajna center. Taste to the Buddhic plane and the centers in the head in the region of the tongue. And smell, and this it goes to what you were talking about, Jerry, to the atmic, but also to the physical plane, and centers in the head in the region of the nose. So, we'd have to look at a chart of siddhis, not siddhis, of nadis, to see, where these lesser centers in the region of the nose are. It's not just about reception of the sense of smell through the nose. These are those centers activated through the sense of smell. Okay, and finally, we come to the first in a series of awakenings that take place on each plane. First, the awakening on the physical plane and the gradually increasing activity of the centers until the probationary path is reached. This is paralleled by the increasing use of the senses and their constant utilization for the identification of the self and its sheaths. So, identification with the self note the lower case s, with the three lower she's, represents the entire evolutionary phase of human development, wherein the sensorially revealed world is first heard, then touched, then seen. Thus, through the senses, the gradually awakening self becomes increasingly outwardly oriented, engaged with its environment. Illusion reigns through immersion in a sensorially revealed not self. Paralleling this outer revelation is a progressive activation of the lower quaternary of chakras, as well as the opening of the lowest tiers of the egoic lotus. This stage is by far the longest period, for the awakening self must become engaged with its outer environment before it can engage with the true self. Then, during the final part of this first stage, which deals with the awakening of the physical etheric centers, the indweller takes his or her first tentative steps on the path of return and begins to shift his or her attention from the outer to the inner worlds. Okay, we're going to stop here because it's a new reading and we're just a minute from being out of time.